Sorry about that. Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers, Southern thinkers. This is LL3's News Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date is Friday, November 24th, 2017. And hopefully everyone had a nice holiday with the United States, with their families and all that. Even though you have protesters and so forth, you always got to look at things in a bigger picture. And you always should be giving thanks every day of the year, not just one day. We even have to focus on our fellow brothers and sisters in the Native American community as well, because they're still human beings, and they gotta get treated with dignity and respect as well. It's like across the board, regardless. So I had a nice time with some members of my family. Small, but really cool. Thank them for having me come over, talk about the good old days. A couple of them I haven't seen in like 4 years. I just gotta go by, chat with them more often. So, yeah, and I know people are still talking about the whole Saudi Arabia thing, and they're gonna try to go attack Iran, which is more for the New World Order as usual. And we see dipshit John McCain on the review. Yes, I am a bend over Bob to the New World Order. See, he needs a peanut on microphone when he talks. That's how weak and pathetic the man is when, as a senator. I'm not gonna, wish him any ill, of course, with the whole brain cancer thing. But when it comes to him as an elected servant, I'm highly critical of this individual. He is not a maverick, never has, never will. I know why they have him on the review, because all those people in there are just Trump bashers. They got nothing else better to do, especially with Whoopi Goldberg. Ooh, let's go back to your movies, okay? Your political views are weak and pathetic. I know I'm ranting here. Nothing new at all. Well, that's what happens when you have the Church of Hollywood trying to tell us how to think and when to wipe our rear ends, right? Absolutely. That's what we want to do. Idolize them. So, that's the same man who supports imperialism and sings God Bless the Patriot when he gets up in the morning. It's a patriotic thing to support security over your freedom. Because look what happened on 9/11. That's what John McCain would say. Insane McCain. I'm digressing on the clown. But, yeah, it's a beautiful day down here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Nice and cool, mild. And I'm at CG's Java Lounge, located at 400 Southwest 1st Avenue, Suite 1, along the New River of the same city. Southwest section of the Andrews Avenue Bridge. I would say it's the west side of the downtown Saloon. Yeah, speaking of tyranny, I decided to talk about a narration of individuals in your history classes in government schools claiming he's one of the greatest presidents in history. And the stuff he's done overall is unconstitutional, tyrannical, or others call it treasonous. However, when it came to the banksters, he didn't play ball with them. This is one of the reasons why this man was assassinated. And it has historical merit. But on the contrary, I am discussing Abraham Lincoln. And I got this from Lou Rockwell, actually it was linked to a site from healthwise.org. This is by Tara Dodrell. It's entitled The Whitewashed Tyranny of Abraham Lincoln. It's a nice long article, so sit back, relax, and if you deal with my voice, that would be great. Alright, as it reads, Abraham Lincoln was the best U.S. president, motivated by a patriotic and Christian desire to preserve the union of states and free the slaves. At least, that is what modern textbooks suggest. There is a bigger story to the 16th President of the United States than the Gettysburg Address and the Emancipation Proclamation. A whitewashed version of the man is all that we learn about him in school. It was our children and grandchildren are still being taught. Public districts and universities have been dutifully parodying that the southern states of Lincoln's era have preserved culture, while northern society was superior. This became the politically correct mantra when teaching about Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War for generations after the Civil Rights Movement. The identity politics is only getting worse and more blatant. The narrative is not only infused heavily with the liberal bias, but moreover it is entirely wrong. Far too many Americans, both current students and adults, believe that the Civil War was a war about slavery. This liberalized version of history does not chronicle the political shenanigans that were undertaken by groups to harden their centralized federal grasp on power, as it is still the case today. Most Americans do not believe that this issue was at play during Lincoln's era, but they are so very wrong. The current political atmosphere in America is a testament to how ignorance of history forces a people to repeat it. President Lincoln should not be revered as a hallowed figure. Honest Abe was a mere man, one who made mistakes and decisions based on his own self-interest. Some of his choices did benefit America, but the benefits were often a positive byproduct of his political self-interest, not benevolence. Lincoln's flopping stance on slavery. The liberal Republicans of the time, who eventually touted Lincoln as a champion of freedom, steadfastly demanded the media and citizens not to paint him with an abolitionist brush. During his first inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln did not wish to be known as an anti-slavery. After putting his hand on the Bible and taking the oath of office, also during his first inaugural address, President Lincoln declared that he had absolutely no legal authority to interfere with the practice of slavery in states where it already existed. He then went on a boldly say that he would be enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. The federal law mandated the return of runaway slaves who fled slave states to seek safety and freedom in the North. And you can just look, you can go to the Library of Congress, my friends, and see this for yourselves. Just look it up. Although the history textbooks tend to gloss over such facts, slavery did not exist in the North. The practice of owning human beings has ended throughout the northern states by 1804. Even after slavery was abolished in the North, racial discrimination still heavily existed in workplaces, schools, and communities. The idea of a white little girl sitting next to a black little girl or a black man and a white woman courting was still not accepted by the tolerant North of freedom-loving elites who were hurling hateful rhetoric toward the South. Meanwhile, indentured servitude in the North, which was a big step but not a leap up from slavery, remained legal. Equally legal was the use of children as the North's virtual slave labor inside its factories, many of whom worked to death and usually had poorer quality of life than the average Southern slave. Politics, money, power were just intricately woven during the 1860s as they are today. Some of the most fervent and vocal anti-slavery Northerners who pushed from the end to slavery were doing it entirely for human rights sentiment. Many wealthy businessmen in the North were pressuring politicians to force the South into submission over slavery because they felt it created unfair competition in the marketplace. So they believe they are special. Okay, my friends? When slavery existed in the southern states, northern businessmen were being forced to compete against free labor. Even child laborers had to be paid something after all. Excuse me here. Congress refused to divide it over the issue of slavery during the months prior to the election of Abraham Lincoln. Heated arguments over the 13th Amendment occurred on a daily basis in the House of Representatives and the Senate. The furious debate continued during early stages of Lincoln's presidency. The 13th Amendment that most Americans associate with Abraham Lincoln was passed at the end of the Civil War in 1865. However, there were previous versions of the 13th Amendment that had a polar opposite intent. Lincoln publicly supported the former version during his swearing-in ceremony. This original version of the 13th Amendment was meant to enshrine the practice of slavery as immutable. It would have amended the Constitution to proactively prevent any future legislator from ever attempting to outlaw the ownership of human beings. This version of what would have become the 13th Amendment if it passed is now often referred as the Corrin Amendment. Thomas Corrin, an Ohio Republican representative and the Lincoln supporter, sponsors the bill. And he says here, "I have no objection to its being expressed in an irrevocable," unquote. Lincoln said when referring Corrin's proposal, according to the report by the Constitution Daily. To the political landscape before Lincoln's election. To truly understand what actually caused the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln's massive flip-flop on slavery, we must understand what happened during the 10 years that led up to his election and the split in the Democrat Party, which occurred as its convention to select a presidential candidate to oppose the Republicans. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. This law permitted each new state into the United States to decide for itself whether or not slavery would be legal inside its borders. It was sponsored by the wings of Republicans to which Lincoln belonged. The legislation overturned the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had banned slavery north of Maryland's southern border. This delineation is commonly known as the Mason-Dixon line. For decades before Lincoln's election, the southern states had been responsible for the most of the federal government's revenue. The South had stringent tariffs forced upon it by northern lawmakers who in turn gave about 80% of the funds to enhance public works in their states and bolstered the struggling economy of the North. There was no income tax in the United States at that time, nor had ever been an income tax as is forbidden by the Constitution. But 85% of revenue the federal government has at its disposal came in form of tariffs that were levied on goods and services from the South. The high taxes that Southerners paid helped to build railroads, roads, manufacturing complexes, and canals in the North. Before 1812, the tariffs were between 15 and 20%. Funds garnered by these tariffs were not enough to keep the federal government fully functional. Without placing an excessive burden on any specific region of the country, when the War of 1812 broke out, tariffs upon Southern businesses were increased up to 26% by Congress, with the net profits being funneled to aid the manufacturers in the North. Can we say extortion? With the new tariff in 1828, the economy of South Carolina took the biggest hit and lost 25% of its export business in just 24 months. In the Southern newspapers, the tariff was nicknamed Tariff of Abominations. The U.S. Congress was dominated by the Whig Party members from the North who passed the tariff, increasing the amount that the South had to pay on exported goods up to 50%. In 1832, South Carolina officials called for a state convention to nullify the both tariff of 1828 and another tariff that had been enacted earlier that same year, arguing that the tariffs were unconstitutional. Unfair taxation was one of the premises that had sparked the America's war of independence against England, and it seemed as if the same issue was going to prompt up a civil war in the still young nation. In early 1860, the Morrill tariff was passed. Even though the tariffs being collected from the South would now total about 87% of the federal government's revenue, the bill was named after Northern steel manufacturer and Republican Congressman Justin Morrill. The legislation levied up to 47% tariff increased on exported goods over the course of 3 years. The burden of this new tariff fell squarely on the shoulders of the South. The industrial businesses of the North were largely domestic sellers. the moral tariff and decrease the trade value of agriculture export overseas, causing a gigantic blow to the Southern economy. Abraham Lincoln was campaigned as a supporter of the tariff. And I read a lot of the stuff on this as well, my friends. And like I said, it's got to do a little verification. Read. And even to those communist sympathizers out there about the whole slave thing and get rid of Southern culture, the statues, they need to read this as well. Zeta Stevens, a Lincoln supporter and a Republican congressman, co-authored the moral tariff during the campaign season. The iron manufacturer from Pennsylvania said that two most important issues of the 1860 election were increased tariffs, putting an end to slavery. Stevens also told a New York crowd that the new tariff would financially cripple the South and the West, but it would enrich the North. He claimed that it would increase the wages of the northern industrial workers and help America achieve greatness. Tax the rich, punish the productive. Henry Clay, who was the leader of the Whig Party, which held the majority in Congress, was able to implement an export tariff of 36% in 1861. The economy of the North began to boom because the bulk of its industrial goods were sold domestically. The Southern economy began a downward spiral, and the vast majority of its revenue based on the exportation of cotton and tobacco to Europe. Former President and South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun was able to negotiate a compromise that would roll back the tariffs to their former 15% range over the course of several years. Henry Clay, a man Lincoln greatly admired, and his Whig Party were infuriated at being forced into compromise with the South. It meant the loss of money that was to be ultimately funneled, in at least in part, to their campaign supporters. Boo-hoo! If the Southern officials had tried to resist the tariffs, they would have been herded up and hanged as enemies of the state. Zeta Stevens was a powerful leader within the Republican Party, and by some accounts, he ran the nation after Abraham Lincoln's assassination. His open hostility towards the South and vindictiveness explains the North's punitive tone during the Reconstruction era. And remember, the 14th Amendment was added as well, which some people say we're all in the same plantation, symbolically speaking. And believe it or not, Andrew Johnson boldly opposed it. The 1860 presidential election. Abraham Lincoln won the 1860 election, but why and how he had been left out of the most history books. This is the causing of miseducation of millions of Americans. The Democrats split along geographical lines during this presidential convention. A northern faction and a southern faction emerged. The convention ended without the nomination of a candidate to run on the ticket. When the Democrats met in Charleston, South Carolina, to hold their convention in April, tensions swirled and boiled over rather quickly. Northern Party leaders felt that Stephen Douglas was their best chance to defeat the black Republicans seeking to end or limit slavery. Southern Democrats largely deemed Douglas to be unfit because he believed that the federal government had no right to determine the legality of slavery. Douglas maintained that issues should remain a state decision. After 6 weeks that the Southern Democrats walked out of the convention without a vote being held, Stephen Douglas was nominated during the second convention that was held in the North. Southern Democrats also held a second convention and nominated the sitting Vice President John Breckinridge to lead the ticket. With the Democrat Party split in half and in chaos, Republicans felt that they would have an edge in the presidential race during their convention, which they held in Chicago the following month. Republicans needed a candidate who would garner the Electoral College votes of the North. Such a scenario would require carrying Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Illinois, and Indiana. After intense debate over a slew of possible candidates, Abraham Lincoln, after 3 votes were taken, received the nomination. During his one term in the Senate, the press had cast Lincoln as a strong all-American man with an inspiring pull-yourself-up-by-the-bootstrap story. He had become the darling of the Northern press during his bitter debates with Stephen Douglas earlier the same year. News coverage of the debates was spread nationwide at the time when the telegraph was still in its infancy. When a three-way race for the presidency turned into a four-man contest, Abraham Lincoln's party felt that their candidate would be a shoo-in if given the right press coverage. John Bell, a wealthy Tennessee plantation owner, was nominated as the candidate for the newly created Constitutional Union Party. The political group was largely composed of community pillars and former politicians. They described themselves as moderates. They believed that the best way to claim the nation and win the election was to avoid the issue of slavery altogether. As a presidential candidate, Lincoln supported the deportation of all Negroes to an unpopularized zone outside of America. This was euphemistically described as a policy of colonization. As late of December 1862, Lincoln was continuing to promote his idea of ridding the U.S. mainland of all Negroes. Even as the Civil War raged on, the stance, which one that was taken by some of the most conservative members of his political party, not to endear him to either abolitionists or Southern voters. Lincoln ran for the highest office in the land in 1860. It was the first time that sectional or regional parties were involved in the presidential race. It was also the first time that the South was not represented on either top or bottom of a winning presidential ticket. Abraham Lincoln did not win a single electoral college vote from either a southern or a border state. In fact, he won the election with only 39% of the popular vote. The message was clear to Southerners. The North, and only the North, would determine the president. And this is what he says, quote, "I will say then that I am not, nor even ever have been in favor of making voters of the Negroes or jurors or qualifying them to hold office, of having them to marry with white people. I will say in addition that there's a physical difference between the white and black races, which I suppose will forbid the two races living together. Upon the term of social and political equity, and insomuch as they cannot so live, that while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, that as much as any other man in favor of the superior position being assigned to the white man." That's Abraham Lincoln made a statement in 1858 in the Lincoln-Douglas debate. So, to all you Confederate haters out there complaining about the statues and taking down the Confederate flag, are you going to go and support on taking down and dismantling the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.? Think about that, will you? Abraham Lincoln's early months in the presidency. Southerners perceived the election of Abraham Lincoln as a solidification of Northern dominance over nearly early aspect of their lives. It took only a day for Americans in South Carolina and multiple Gulf Coast states to call for secession. Despite the mounting tensions between the North and South, Lincoln did not have a single man who lived below the Mason-Dixon line on his cabinet as an advisor, nor did he take a meeting with any Southern lawmakers from that time that he was elected throughout the beginning of the Civil War. If the preservation of the Union was a top priority for Lincoln, he should have attempted to prevent the mounting hostilities, address that concern that the South had been battling against for more than a decade, and try to prevent the fever pitch from getting louder. But he did not. Lincoln ignored the South's economics and states' rights worries repeatedly, so their distrust of the new president increased dramatically. Instead of attempting to meet with Southerners to calm their fears of the continued tariff increases or working towards eventually ending slavery peaceably, Lincoln signed the moral tariff into law. Taking his power a step further, the new president vowed that he would ensure enforcement on the high tariffs of southern states that seceded from the United States. It signaled to the southern states that they were trapped in a position of perpetual servitude to produce federal revenue. President Lincoln was essentially calling the South out, but the Southerners were not bluffing. They lost their patience to have taxation without representation for the sole benefit of the North, and so they succeeded, where South Carolina became the first state to exist in the Union. Northern members of Congress began preparing for a military campaign as their Southern peers were packing up their Washington, D.C. offices for train rides home. James Buchanan, alongside other current and former politicians of the time, reached out to the South, as well as the incoming administration, to engage in a constitutional convention that was followed by a direct vote national vote on divisive issues threatening to tear apart the country. It was Kansas Senator John Crittenden, not Abraham Lincoln, who took bold steps to preserve the Union and prevent a civil war that would ultimately take more than 650,000 American lives. Modern history books ignore the Kansas senator's noble efforts, as well as a decision by Lincoln and his party to embrace bloodshed. The Crittenden Compromise called for immediate legislation to create a far more permanent solution by the way of constitutional amendments for issues dividing the nation. The compromise called for extending the slavery boundaries established by the 1828 Missouri Compromise, which has been determined by the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. This was the North's proverbial fig leaf, which was being offered to appease Southerners in the hope of the friendly relations could be renewed. The act, which did not get some support from powerful senators in the North, was sent to a special committee. However, it died when some of Lincoln's most staunch supporters quickly rejected the Crittenden Compromise. History is to record us. The Kansas senator cautioned Congress when presenting this bill. It is to record that when the destruction of the Union was imminent, we stood quarreling. That's the question. Where elected officials from Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida received no communication from President Lincoln to assure them that the fiscal attacks of the South would come to an end, they also voted to secede. North Carolina was the last to leave and ultimately lost the most men to the war. And it's a real shame, my friends. That's why you have to always look at all sides of this terrible conflict. That's why I say the Southern Confederate States were the bad guys, the wicked doers. They didn't got to teach you in school about how tyrannical Abraham Lincoln was. And I'm going to continue on here. President Lincoln's War. Every step in the country ran headlines about the South's succession. Neither the press nor the northeastern public disputed the rights of the states to legally and peaceably withdraw from the United States, at least not initially, when a member of the Abraham Lincoln's cabinet suggested that they just let the South leave peaceably. The president had been quoted as replying, "Let the South go? Where then we will get our revenue?" You want me to repeat that? Let the South go? Where then we get our revenue? It's like Glamour Man. The world should revolve around him. Respect for the South's right to secede so vanished not because of a more in-depth look at our Constitution, but because wealthy Northern business leaders suddenly realized that they would soon be competing in a truly free market, sans high tariffs against the South. This fact, on top of the worries about the massive loss of annual revenue resulting from lost tariffs, soon caused saber rattling of epic proportions. Abraham Lincoln finally took a meeting, a covert one, with a Southerner. He met with Virginia Secession Convention delegate Colonel John Baldwin. The colonel, like many of his peers, preferred for his state to remain as part of the United States if a compromise could be reached. During the April 4th, 1861 meeting, Colonel Baldwin learned that the president was already plotting a military assault against the South at Fort Sumter. Okay? Interesting. Planning for an attack at Fort Sumter. I will proceed. A Virginia delegate tried to convince Lincoln that any action would force Southern states in an all-out war with the North. The colonel also told the president that if the South were permitted to leave the Union peaceably, economic and historical ties would ultimately bring the two geographical factions back together again. Another point of fact that modern history textbooks omit is why Fort Sumter was a place that Lincoln chose to make a stand. It was not merely a military fort. Fort Sumter was a tariff collection facility. The president's attempt to terrorize the South into submission by assaulting Fort Sumter was an epic and very bloody failure. Colonel Baldwin responded to a letter that was sent by Northern politicians asking what would become of Union men in Virginia after the Battle of Fort Sumter. There are no Union men in Virginia, but those who are the Union men will stand to their arms and make a fight, which will go down in history as an illustration of what brave people can do in defense of their liberties after having exhausted every means of pacification. After losing early battles of the Civil War, Lincoln and his supporters, both in industry and the Senate, began to anguish over the possibility that England and European nations would send military support to the South. Since his administration was viewed throughout the world as a despotic regime, there was concern that the Republican leadership would be tried like war criminals. Threats and a naval blockade ensued to prevent thought interventions by other nations. Lincoln even threatened war against any nation that sought to provide humanitarian aid. Interesting, huh? I remember reading about that blockade as well. Another author Charles Dickens penned a now obscure but relevant opinion piece about the Civil War in a London newspaper during the final weeks of 1861. The Northern onslaught upon slavery is more than a piece of specious humbug disguised to conceal its desire for the economic control of the United States. Unquote. Infamous socialist Karl Marx also saw the Civil War for exactly what it was. He wrote, "The war between the North and the South is a tariff war. The war is further, not in any principle, does not touch the question of slavery. In fact, turns the Northern lust for power." Now, I'm not too crazy about Karl Marx in a lot of areas, but he's spot on this one. I'll be very honest. During his last month as President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln trampled the Constitution to create a military dictatorship that was necessary to wage and win a war against his own people. Abraham Lincoln's unconstitutional act on high crimes, and there was like a tombstone or a stone here, memorandum stone here, where it said about the Confederate veterans, sons of the Confederate veterans. And it says here, approximately 260,000 Southerners were killed or wounded while defending the constitutional freedoms, which were handed down by our founding fathers. All races and religions joined together to defend the Confederacy, their families, their property, and their states' rights against the Northern aggression led by Abraham Lincoln. So, all races and religions, because the fact was there was many of them that were African American descent fought for the Confederacy, and so were Jews, people who are Jewish by faith as well. Look up Jews in the Confederacy. There's a lot to learn here. I admit myself, I'm learning this as well, my friends. And we'll just see what it has to say about the unconstitutional action high crimes. 1. Lincoln circumvented Congress when calling up the United States Army, 75,000 men initially. 2. He refused to call Congress back into session after ordering military action at Fort Sumter. 3. Ordered the Navy to blockade southern ports, and a direct act of war. Such an act could only be undertaken by an order of Congress. It was a diabolical tactic to prevent food imports in order to starve the southern states. Sanctions? Absolutely. And we should do this to other countries now today. That's exceptional. 4. In the escalation of Lincoln's starvation strategy, he ordered General Sherman to begin a military campaign against civilians, cities, and hospitals. Women and children were not spared. General Sherman was nicknamed Burning Sherman because he randomly burned entire cities, even in the middle of winter. Lincoln ordered Sherman to terrorize the South by pillaging and plundering at a level that surpassed even the ancient Roman armies. As America's first war criminal, General Sherman is one of the main reasons why disease and starvation killed significantly most people in the Civil War than combat. Look up the burning of Atlanta. 5. Suspended writ of habeas corpus, yet another act that is a function of Congress. Suspension of habeas corpus gave Lincoln the power to arrest Americans without filing a criminal charge and permitted him to have them held indefinitely without either a charge or a trial. Could we say Alien Sedition Act on steroids? 6. Lincoln violated the Constitution once again when he refused to comply with the Supreme Court order to immediately restore the rights of habeas corpus. Our founding fathers added habeas corpus protection into the Constitution, specifically so tyranny will never again reign in America as it had in Europe and when the New World was under British control. 7. Lincoln had a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court arrested after receiving a court order to restore habeas corpus protections. Upon receiving the ruling of the High Court, the President and sent a federal marshal to arrest the Chief Justice. You see this? The world should revolve around him. This is Abraham Lincoln on the Federal Reserve note, the $5 bill, and they have a Lincoln Memorial on this prick. Excuse my language, but that's how I feel about these people. 8. There has never been a more substantial threat to free press in history of our country than the 16th President of the United States. Lincoln sent soldiers to destroy printing presses and related newspaper publishing tools, outlets which did not support his handling of the Southern succession. In response to negative editorials about the military invasion of the South and his overall war policy, Lincoln also commandeered and then closed 300 northern newspapers. 9. President Lincoln did not stop at just destroying private property and commandeering newspapers. He also arrested and imprisoned many of the editors and publishers of those same press outlets. 10. Before the end of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had ordered the arrest of approximately 20,000 Americans without charging them with the crime and permitting them to have their day in court. The citizens who were unconstitutionally detained and had outspoken against Lincoln personally, the Civil War, or were merely suspected of harboring anti-war sentiments. Can we say the Patriot Act? Can we say the indefinite detention of the NDAA at that time? Remember one thing too about the NDAA. On New Year's Eve around 2011, I believe, President Barack Obama signed it into law, and he said one of his favorite presidents was Abraham Lincoln. Think about that. To all the people that praise Lincoln but hate Obama, you're just contradicting yourself. 11. The 16th president illegally took upon himself to create a new state. West Virginia quickly came into existence after Lincoln declared war on the South as a northern friendly region with the South. Yes, illegally, he conscripted the state of West Virginia without their consent. 12. Lincoln arrested and imprisoned the entire Maryland state legislature and prevent them from holding a debate and taking a vote on secession. The elected officials were never changed with a crime or granted a trial. Interesting, right? Absolutely. You're a great president, Abraham Lincoln. To all those folks out there who are Republican, members of the Republican Party, and some members of the Tea Party, go and celebrate the Lincoln breakfast. This is your hero. And you're critical of former President Barack Obama, but you praise this man? Stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Stop being a bunch of parrots. Concluding the war on the northern aggression. What occurred in 1861 still festers to this day, and almost all of it had been cloaked in politically expedient lies. A tyrannical centralized government that was hell-bent on dominating the southern states was colorized by the election of Abraham Lincoln. What was known as the War on Northern Aggression throughout the world gave birth to an overbearing federal government that is answerable to no one. A false supremacy of the federal government over the states, a government that cannot control its own growth or spending. The principle that agents of the federal government are above the law, a government that does not obey its own constitution, and it spawned a perpetual cycle of servitude for all Americans in the form of income tax. That national tax system requires a tracking of everything that every American does. They did it for the money, and it's only the money. Northern troops were enraged, and their army began experiencing increased desertion. When, in the middle of the war, Northern politicians reinvented the war as a crusade against slavery for political capital, as it means to further punish the South. Northern soldiers were deeply disturbed by this new narrative, which stated that they were expected to continue killing their own countrymen for the sole benefit of the Negroes. It was not what they had enlisted for. Meanwhile, many, if not most, of the freed slaves had been driven from the plantations by Northern soldiers, for they were afraid to leave only places that they knew to be their homes. Most of the slaves had come to consider their owners as family, and their feelings was often mutual. Allowing slaves to voluntarily remain looked terrible politically, and the press would have just had a heyday if the overwhelming majority had remained. So slaves were driven into the wilderness with very few options for their survival, other than crime, in response to the rapid crimes by former slaves who sadly have no other way to survive. The Ku Klux Klan was formed as a vigilante organization, but was quickly spiraled out of control with the growing racial tensions. At no point in this catastrophe was generally helping the color go of the North war machine. See, right there, the black person, the Negro, were considered the pawns, the patsies, the scapegoats for what was going on. That was completely dead wrong too. They were being used, exploited, and that was unacceptable. This is just an example of government, tyrannical governments. It's happening worldwide. Just to let you folks know. America's founding fathers labor over what might be the most important document that was ever written by man, only be gutted less than 100 years later by a president who was falsely revered. Lincoln may have taken actions that ultimately brought the broken Union back together, but his aftermath of his role as a despot and military dictator marks him as the worst enemy that the United States has ever known. Lincoln came closer to completely destroying the United States than anyone else. The institution of slavery would have ended soon, with or without a war. If Lincoln had chosen without option, or if the South has been allowed to participate in the presidential election, then America would have been a cultural and economic base obliterated. The U.S. would have advanced centuries beyond where it is now, and race relations would be good. Instead, most of America was sent back to the Stone Age, and the flames of racial hatred were fanned in a way that may never be truly quenched. Lincoln never expressed remorse for any of it. He was, by every definition, a sociopath. He would be at home in today's liberal politics. Lessons be learned. The history of the American Civil War ought to provide us with some important lessons. It is easy to understand why the lessons are avoided by today's leftist educators. The American Civil War was a dire warning about the density of any civil welfare state. In the early stages of the disease, the U.S. political system was brought to its knees by class warfare. Eventually, as the class system ever polarized, one group became entirely responsible for financial support of another. America became the first welfare state, when the South provided the welfare benefits to the North. The North was the South's ungrateful and jealous welfare child. Eventually, the North shifted from simple ingratitude to a full-fledged resentment against the hand that fed it. This irrational resentment is eventual consequence of all welfare states, wherever they continue for long enough. The solution to the North's jealousy and resentment was violence, which it justified through the rationalizations of injustices by the very people whom it had developed a parasitic relationship with. Everything collapsed once the North ran out of other people's money. If it had behaved as if that there had been no need for thriftiness, since more money could always be taken, but there isn't always more. Compare this to the politics of today. Very little has actually changed. Between all the political correctness, socialist movements, race baiting, and identity politics of liberalism today, we still find that we destroy the character and the spirit of the people, whichever we are too generous. Through our excessive generosity, we encourage the beneficiaries of our philanthropy to develop a sense of entitlement and a belief in the righteousness of theft. And you got other sources here as well. Very interesting, I would say, my friends. And the good book, too, The Real Lincoln, that was written by Thomas J. DeLorenzo. I recommend everyone start reading it. And to be very honest, I remember there was a show, a Chris Ann Hall show. And you can look it up, too. How the U.S. Constitution ended slavery. It was Article 1, Section 9. That was the first step. Then during the Jefferson's reign, or administration, the Congress passed and Jefferson signed into law the prohibition of importation of slavery. That helped out a lot. Then technology, the cotton gin that was invented by Eli Whitney, the slave trade demand starting to dwindle. And of course, you got your terrible slave owners too. I'm not going to argue about that. But in a period of time, this could have ended without a shot being fired. And do I have some political differences with the Confederate States of America based on their Constitution? Yeah, I can say that. There have some differences with them as well. But my friends, we always got to look at the bigger picture. And many folks don't recall the Great Irish Uprising, the draft riots that happened in New York City and a couple other towns in Wisconsin. And they say, and they told people to avoid the draft. You can pay $300. $300 right now is like $30,000. And a lot of the Irish immigrants, Irish descent, were forced to go on that war. And so, and that's when the big riot broke out. And of course, the Negroes were a lot of, many of them were lynched too, which was a real shame. And of course, Union soldiers shot a lot of people. It was like they said it was blood on the river, like the river of blood in Manhattan. Movie Gangs in New York did portray that, even though it was a fictional novel, it was based on a lot of historical facts. So, and you remember as well, in Real Lincoln, New York City wanted to see from the state and the United States to be a free trade zone, but they were concerned about that as well. And it's very morose, my friends, on what happened. But we have to learn everything about what occurred during that time and teach one another instead of screaming and yelling and going to protesting and have bogus flags and call everyone racist. That's is one waste of energy. Facts are important. The past is today's greatest teacher. That's the way we gotta do, educate one another. We have a great opportunity to live in harmony. It may not be perfect, but it'll be a hell of a lot better. And don't even get involved in these Mickey Mouse political activist groups. I see a great amount of them, I just start laughing. Be your own individual. Be the teacher. Be the rabbi. And have a good, honorable discussion, even around this time. And I'll be very frank. The banksters did not like Lincoln because he used greenbacks. That's one of my personal view. In my home research, the reason why he got assassinated. And John Wilkes Booth was the perfect accent. But thereafter, I was not intrigued with Abraham Lincoln. This is why we gotta keep reading and share this information with everyone around. I'm gonna take a quick break, so stay tuned. Cool. So next story here, I'm gonna be talking about. Just a couple more after this one. This came from the Free Beacon, written by Rachel Frommer. Jews are not a nation. Came out today. It says here, students at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, supporting an anti-Israel student government resolution were caught on hidden camera, rejecting the concept of Jewish nationhood and denying Jewish students to right to participate in the discussion about anti-Palestinian conflict. In one of the exchanges in the footage obtained exclusively by the Washington Free Beacon, students agree that Palestinian activists should engage in a reevaluation of the past nonviolent stance. In another conversation, Ahmad Ismail, a member of the Students Ally for Freedom and Equality, SAFE, the group that led the coalition club's supportive resolution, is seen having an extended argument with an unidentified male and female about the existence between a relationship between Judaism and Israel. Jews are not a nation, she said repeatedly. There is no nation called Judaism, Ismail said. Whereas on the map, there's a country called Jews. There's a one called Judea. Long time ago, before the Romans wiped it out in 70 CE or 80. Zionism is a dirty political ideology, said Ismail, co-founder of the Michigan Muscle Club, which endorsed safe motion. Zionism, a term coined in the 19th century, refers to the goal of rebuilding a Jewish state in the land of Israel. There are political, religious, and cultural forms of Zionism. Ismail reinforced his comments in a phone call with Free Beacon, said that Zionism was the Jewish version of Ku Klux Klan or ISIS. Any person who is a Zionist believes in the state of Israel, even though it oppresses, kills, and millions of Palestinians, which I call terrorism, said Ismail. Most Jews are Zionists, he added. As proof, though, that Zionism is no inherited title of Judaism, Ismail said there are more non-Jewish Zionists than Jewish Zionists. Ismail noted that he has lots of Jewish friends, and that terrorism in Israel has nothing to do with it being Jewish. He said that the views were formed by legislators given to him by SAFE and his experience growing up as a Muslim in Egypt. He said he has never taken a class on Zionism or the history of Judaism. In another exchange documented the practice by Palestinian activists of anti-normalization or refusal to speak with or participate in ordinary conversation with those they believe to be pro-Israel. A Palestinian female student has been seen cutting off discussion on Palestinian politics. She was leading the public hallway. When she noticed that a male student wearing a traditional Jewish skull cap and a ritual tassel known as tzitzit had started to listen. "You're not welcome to this conversation," she told him, prompting praise from other students on the strength it takes to say this to someone's face. A man who said he was Muslim and supportive of the Terrorism motion later approached the group and asked if his friend was sent away because he's Jewish. He goes, "No, it's because he's a Zionist," he was told. She later instructed someone to tell the Jewish student that he is welcome to ask permission to stand and listen and not to ask questions. Conditionally invited to ask permission to be an observer of the discussion, the Jewish student is granted permission to listen. You can't ask me questions, though. The Palestinian students, the Palestinian student. I'm not going to have a conversation with you. Those are my guiding principles. The Palestinian student who steered the exchange could not be reached for comment. The footage was taken on the night of the 8-hour student government meeting last week, during which students representatives debated and ultimately passed a secret ballot vote, the Safe Anti-Israel Resolution. The motion asked university regents to create a committee to investigate the ethical and moral implications of our investments, with Boeing, Hewlett-Packard, the United Technologies, which are accused of being involved in human rights violations against the Palestinian people. Safe leaders are also seen in the footage repeating the group's public stance that the resolution is not intended to harm Israel. Even as the Safe co-president then admits the goal is to put economic pressure on Israel and is aimed at the people and the government, naming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman. It was the first ever successful divestment vote at Ann Arbor campus after 15 years of safe campaigning and 10 failed motions. Hours after the vote, the U.S. administration released a statement saying it will not allow political consideration of a student vote to influence its investment decisions. Safe did not respond for comment. Interesting there. So you got some criticism, and other people can listen, but they can't speak their mind. That's pretty crappy, I would say. Like, you can sit here and shut up. You're gonna listen to what I said, no questions. Don't get me wrong. I'm critical of some of the politics in Israel themselves. Israeli government. And it's a very complex issue. You got good folks getting treated like garbage on both sides, and look what happened. And now people are collectively being attacked. And many of them in that country are sick of it. People have to realize one thing too: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have something in common. It's the roots of Abrahamic views, to an extent. I did talk about that in some of my past episodes as well. They support Jesus the prophet, Jonah, David, etc., and King Solomon, just to give you a few. So they can have that. They can have that free speech. It can be critical, but you know what? If people want to ask questions, have an open platform. You can't talk here. And right there, you just hurt the movement. That's how I look at it. You hurt your cause, as far as I'm concerned. I think the Palestinian people have the right to be treated fairly, be treated like human beings. But the students of Allied Freedom and Equality, you don't want that person to speak. As far as I'm concerned, your movement is null and void. And I understand about infiltrators and provocateurs and so forth, but your dialogue has become unmeritable. All right, next one here. You have the naturalinterest.org, the misuse of terrorism list, Paul R. Pillar. As it reads here, President Trump's placement of North Korea on the official U.S. list of state-sponsored terrorism continues a manipulation by several administrations of this list of reasons other than terrorism. Neither an earlier removal of North Korea from the list by George W. Bush administration in 2008 nor Trump's return of North Korea to the list this week had anything to do with any charges in North Korea's conduct as far as terrorism is concerned. The Bush administration delisting was part of an unsuccessful effort to do something about Pyongyang's nuclear program. Trump administration has seized upon relisting is supposedly another form of pressure on North Korea, with concern again centered on nuclear weapons. Rationales being voiced for the newest move show what a stretch it is from what is supposed to be the criteria defined by statute for placement on the state-sponsored list. Some defenders of the move referred to North Korea's actions 3 decades ago. Pyongyang really was doing international terrorism in the 1980s, mainly aimed against South Korea. It was responsible for the bomb in Rangoon that killed several visiting members of the South Korean cabinet in 1983. It was planned a bomb in a South Korean air civilian airline in 1970, killing more than 100. But North Korea got out of the international terrorism in subsequent years with the hope of gaining some degree of international political rehabilitation. In the term, the legal standards of remaining of the state-sponsored list, the delisting of North Korea in 2008 was overdue. A more recent North Korean perpetrated incident was the assassination in Malaysia in this February of Kim Jong-nam, the estranged half-brother of the North Korean ruler Kim Jong-un. This killing being performed callously on foreign soil. Technically, that meets the definition of international terrorism. It is yet another example of repugnant and brutal behavior by the Pyongyang regime. It had nothing to do with any campaign of terrorism that posed a threat to anyone than other members of Kim Jong-un's own family or regime he perceived as possible threat to his rule. Other countries inside North Korea have been subject of misuse of the state-sponsored list. The Reagan administration took Iraq of the list as part of its tilt toward Iraq during the Iraq-Iran War. The George H.W. Bush administration returned Iraq to the list after Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq. Neither had to do with any change in Iraqi behavior regarding international terrorism. Cuba remained on the list for reasons involving anti-Castro domestic U.S. politics long after it had ceased doing anything that could be construed as international terrorism. Barack Obama made more of an honest effort than most of other U.S. presidents to respect the legal criteria associated with the state-sponsored list. The belated removal of Cuba from the list was part of this. The Obama administration reportedly considered relisting North Korea, but refrained it because it could not identify a sound legal rationale for doing so. Now you can say whatever you want, but build relationships, not destroy them. Other administrations' misuse of the state-sponsored list has been a sloppy way of expressing disapproval of regimes they didn't like. The sloppiness hides how such regimes may exhibit multiple forms of objectionable conduct, each posing its own problems, and each of which can be addressed through different means. Blurring everything together into miasma of undifferentiating rogue state behavior undermines the possibility of using diplomacy and carefully crafted incentive to ameliorate any form of objectionable conduct, be it terrorism or weapons of proliferation or something else, even if we can't solve every problem we have with the regime. Misusing the list of state-sponsored terrorism sends a message that the United States did not care all that much about terrorism itself. It undermines the credibility of efforts that already really focus on countering terrorism. Most fundamentally, it diminishes the incentive of the target regime to get out or stay out of international terrorism. If the North Korea regime sees that it is going to be branded as a state-sponsored terrorism, regardless of what it's doing with terrorism-wise, it has much less incentive against sliding back into the reprehensive things it was doing in 1980. It is one form of poor statesmanship in which Trump is not alone. His moves regarding the state-sponsored list also does indicate a thoughtful and careful and creative thinking about ways to counter the North Korean nuclear challenge. And like I said before, I'm not crazy about their government in that country as well. However, we have to really look at the past. They say 30% of the people in North Korea were bombed to death during that conflict, and they left that nation to rubble. Just gotta let it be, leave it be. People are tired, even in that peninsula itself, are tired of getting friction. Because they got relatives, cousins from both sides. They want to see each other. And they haven't done it in half a century. That's very disheartening. Let Korea unite in one. And have a government that will benefit all of the Korean brothers and sisters. And even with this whole thing of putting them on a terrorist watch list and all that, it's been totally ludicrous. It's been going on for years. This is all not more than a monumental deception. I say, don't misuse it, butt out, not get involved in tangled alliances, and imperialism is a road to blowback. Alright, one more thing. Came from the 10th Amendment Center, and it came out a few days ago. Pretty cool stuff here. Pretty good stuff here. And this one's entitled, came on the 21st. 10th Amendment Center block. Oops. Bill required to fully inform juries introduced in New Hampshire. The doing began. And this came out 21st. It said a bill pre-filled in New Hampshire House will require courts to fully inform juries of their right to vote not guilty when a guilty verdict will be held in unjust results. The coalition of 8 representatives pre-filled House Bill 1443 for the 2018 legislative session. The legislation would amend the current jury instruction law and require the court to explain to the jury it has a right to acquit if they believe the guilty verdict would be unjust. State law RSA 519 verse 23/A currently reads, in all criminal proceedings, the court shall permit the defense to inform the jury of its rights to judge the facts and application of the law in relation to the facts in controversy. If passed into law, HB 1443 would amend this section to read, at the request of the defendant or the defense attorney, the court shall instruct the jury as follows. If you have a reasonable doubt as to whether the state has proved in any way or more elements of the crime charge, you may find the defendant not guilty. However, if you find the state have proved all elements of the offense charge beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty unless your right of conscience dictates that the facts of the case reveal that a guilty verdict will yield an unjust sentence. Currently, you should find the defendant not guilty. Interesting. If passed, HB 1443 will help ensure New Hampshire juries understand the discretion that they have the right to exercise in the trial. It is an important distinction to require the court to inform the jury instead of having the defense do so, said Michael Bolden of the 10th Amendment Center. When it comes from an official source like this, it becomes more likely that a jury will consider this option. Last year, the state passed a similar bill, HB 2070, by a vote of 184 to 145, but was ultimately killed by the Senate. Bunch of cowards, right? Absolutely. Vampires. Bah! Even the live free or die state, they have vampires. Jury notification overview. Juries have the power to notify a law in an individual case by finding the defendant not guilty when he heavily clearly violated the law in question. The jury can use its discretion to determine that the law itself is unjust, immoral, or unconstitutional and refuse to convict. New Hampshire case of Doug Darrell demonstrates how jury notification works in practice. Police arrested Darrell and charged him with a felony cultivating marijuana. He claimed he used marijuana for religious and medical purposes. Although he was clearly guilty by the letter of the law, the jury refused to convict. Thomas Jefferson defended jury notification, writing that if the question relates to a point of public liberty, or if it be one of those in which the judges may suspect a bias, the jury undertake to decide both law and fact. If they be taken, a decision against right, which is casual only, is less dangerous to the state and less afflicting to the loser than one of which makes part of a regular and uniform system. Jury notification provides a mechanism for the people to invalidate unjust laws. Most jurors do not realize they have this power and courts to inform them as this option. If HB 2070 passes, defendants will have the opportunity to ensure they face a fully informed jury. I gotta give them the thumbs up. Make this happen, New Hampshire. Exercise. If not, if this doesn't pass, everyone has that freedom of conscience all across the United States. Jury notification is common law. Freedom of conscience is righteous, vital, and a natural born right. So I encourage the people in New Hampshire to petition their senators on making this a reality. To the rest of the people in the United States, learn about jury notification. Look it up. I did it so many times. Go out there, do your homework, and boom. Share it with everyone you know. Okay? Alright. Well, my friends, it's like a little over an hour. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share throughout the social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or something that's interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please address your correspondences with the court. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Tumblr, YouTube, Freedoms Network, Scene.life. I've been having issues with that site. I don't know what's going on, but I'll say it until I'll get handled. Minds.com, FutureNet.club, Patreon.com, which is look with 3 eyes. If you want to be a sponsor, support, and all that, that'd be great. And you kick me on Gab, which is gab.ai, and that's more of a free speech version of Twitter. Or you can email me at looknumber3@gmail.com. Or the encrypted ones, numbers 03@protonmail.com. Alright, my friends, that's all for now. Once again, thank you for your time. Let's always remember that the maniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.